Imagine you're a tiny lizard, hanging onto a tree branch, while winds are racing past you at 265 kilometers per hour. You can't run, you can't fight, and if you lose your grip, you're gone. But here's where this story gets incredible. After two powerful hurricanes hit a group of Caribbean islands, scientists came back and discovered something strange. The lizards that remained were physically different from the ones scientists had measured before the storms. And this gave scientists something extraordinarily rare: a glimpse of natural selection happening in real time. The story begins in 2017 on two small islands in the Turks and Caicos Islands, Pine Cay and Water Cay. Scientists were studying a small tree-dwelling lizard called the Turks and Caicos anole, Anoles scriptus. They were measuring the animal's bodies, limbs, and toe pads. At the time, they had no idea that their measurements were about to become extremely valuable, because just days later, Hurricane Irma arrived. On September 8, 2017, Irma battered the islands with sustained winds reaching about 265 kilometers per hour. And then, less than 2 weeks later, another major storm arrived, Hurricane Maria, with winds reaching around 200 kilometers per hour. Think about what a hurricane means for a tiny lizard living in vegetation. The wind doesn't just push against its body. It tries to rip the animal away from the branch. So what matters most?
Grip.
Anoles have specialized toe pads that help them cling to surfaces. And scientists suspected that certain body shapes could give some lizards an advantage in extreme winds. After the hurricanes, the researchers returned to the islands. And this is where the story becomes extraordinary. They compared the lizards they found after the storms with the measurements they had taken before the hurricanes. The surviving population showed noticeable differences. They tended to have larger toe pads, longer forelimbs, and shorter hind limbs. But why would these particular features matter? The scientists needed to test an idea, so they created a miniature hurricane.
Well,
Sort of. They placed the lizards on a perch and used a powerful leaf blower to create strong airflow. The lizards were safely caught if they were blown off. And something fascinating happened. When the wind became strong, the lizards didn't simply flatten themselves against the branch. They gripped tightly with their front limbs. Their hind limbs were more exposed to the airflow, and that helped explain the strange pattern seen after the hurricanes. A lizard with longer hind limbs could present more surface area to the wind. A shorter hind limb could reduce that effect. Meanwhile, larger toe pads and longer forelimbs could help the animal maintain its grip. And this is where Charles Darwin's idea of natural selection suddenly becomes very real. The hurricane didn't look at the lizards and say, "You need shorter legs." That's not how evolution works. Instead, there was already variation among the lizards. Some were better suited to holding onto branches in extreme winds. Others were more vulnerable to being blown away. The hurricane acted like a brutal filter. Those better able to cling were more likely to survive. And that's natural selection. But there's an important detail. The hurricane didn't magically rewrite the DNA of individual lizards overnight. The researchers observed a rapid shift in physical traits among the population after the storms. For a genetic change to become an evolutionary adaptation, the survivors would need to reproduce and pass advantageous genetic variants to future generations. In other words, the hurricane selected, the surviving lizards reproduced, and over generations, evolution could change the population. But scientists weren't satisfied with simply observing the physical changes. They wanted to know, could there be specific genes involved in these traits? Later genetic research examined differences between anole populations and identified candidate genes associated with traits, such as limb development. One gene that drew particular attention was HS6ST1. Researchers then used CRISPR gene editing in brown anoles to investigate its role in development. When the gene was disrupted, the animals developed differences, including a shorter fourth toe. This doesn't mean that one hurricane simply edited the lizard's DNA. Instead, it shows something much deeper. Genes influence the physical traits that natural selection can act upon. And that's why this tiny lizard story matters far beyond the Caribbean. Extreme weather can kill enormous numbers of animals. But sometimes, it may also change which traits are favored in the survivors. If extreme events become more frequent or intense, they could become important forces shaping populations over time. A hurricane is usually thought of as destruction. But for evolution, destruction can also become a filter. In 2017, hurricanes Irma and Maria devastated Caribbean islands. And in the aftermath, scientists found something remarkable. The survivors were not simply the lizards that happened to be lucky. Their physical traits appeared to matter. Their ability to hold on mattered. And for a brief moment, we got to watch natural selection at work. Because sometimes evolution doesn't happen quietly over millions of years. Sometimes, a hurricane can reveal it.